Good evening, my younglings. So, as promised, today your next video is about your erythrocytes. We are going to start zooming in on your specific formed elements in your blood. And because today we are focusing in on your red blood cells, or your erythrocytes, this is more than likely going to be the longest video in your blood series. So just bear with me on that. Sit tight, and we're going to try to go over everything with your erythrocytes. So your blood objective number 4 is to discuss erythrocytes in terms of structure, function, and production. So this is going to be everything you need to know about your red blood cells in this lovely little objective, from their job to start to finish, how they're formed and how they die, what they look like, all that kind of good stuff. And then for your next objective, we will get into their chemical properties that are important. And the objective after that is we will discuss the long list of disorders and anemias that can go wrong. So objective 4 is going to be your longest objective throughout this. Right? So most of the formed elements within your bloodstream only survive for a few days. Right? Most blood cells do not divide. They are not like most of the cells in your body, where when you stub your toe and your toe is bruised, the skin cells and other things like that on your toe grow, divide, and heal to replace those cells. Your blood cells don't actually divide and multiply that way. Your blood cells are made by other means within your bone marrow. So with your blood cells, you get what you get, and they have a set lifespan before they die. And this counts for all of your blood cells. And blood cells are very specifically formed to their function and what they need to do. The only blood cells that are in your body that are complete cells with nuclei and the full range of everything you think a cell needs to function are the leukocytes, or the white blood cells that are in your system. And we will talk more about those in a little bit, but today we're focusing on your erythrocytes. The erythrocytes, of course, are your red blood cell, cyte meaning cell, erythro means red as your combining form, so red cells. And you can see a bunch of them in this lovely picture. They look like itty-bitty little donuts or beanbag chairs, and they are everywhere, as you can tell. You see a few neutrophils, which you will recognize from our lab video if you've watched the lab video. And this one's a monocyte. And a few platelets, once again, from the lab videos. But most of these are our focus today, which are your erythrocytes. So your red blood cells, right? Just to let you know a little bit more about them, right? They are about 25% of the total cell count in your body, right? Their job is purely to transport oxygen from your lungs to the cells and carbon dioxide from the cells back to the lungs. They never leave the blood vessels if things go according to plan. Hopefully, within their entire lifespan, they're just going to be roaming around your blood vessels, pumping as your blood pumps with your heart. The reason why they look like little donuts here is because they are a shape called a biconcave disc. That means they look like a little frisbee disc that has an indentation on both sides, almost as though someone was attempting to cut donuts, but didn't cut all the way through, so they didn't fully get the donut hole out of the dough. So they have an indentation on both sides of them. As a matter of fact, your next slide has a better close-up, and in this one you can see that they dip in on both sides right there. Right? That's important, right? That's important. That helps with things. Your red blood cells have to be flexible. They contain some other information as well, like another protein called hemoglobin that we will talk about in a minute. Hemoglobin is abbreviated with a big H and a little b. But these are some important questions right here for you, right? All of your red blood cells are biconcave discs, so they can maximize surface to volume ratio. Why is that important? The more surface to volume ratio they have, the more oxygen they can carry. Your red blood cells have to be flexible. They are squishy, like little squishy donuts. Why is squishy important? Because they're knocking around on the insides of all of your blood vessels and capillaries in your body. If they were sharp and pointy, you'd be in pain constantly. That would hurt. You'd be being stabbed by 25% of the cells in you. They have to be flexible so they can fit through everything from your big aorta to the tiniest of capillaries. They squeeze through. It's their job. They have to be flexible. And as your first slide said, your erythrocytes are kind of weird in the cell world. They do not have a nucleus. They don't have organelles. They're not complete, fully functional cells in and of themselves. So they are anucleated and they have no organelles. Why? Because they're filled with the stuff that they need, which is that hemoglobin that we will talk about soon. They don't need to replicate on their own, so they don't need a place to store DNA. They don't need a nucleus. They don't need a brain. They have a singular job. And they don't need any organelles. Meaning they're not going to do any functions that require them to use your metabolism. If you think about that, that is super important, because if your red blood cells are transporting the nutrients to all the other cells in your body that do need to utilize your metabolism, you don't want your red blood cells to also need to use those nutrients. So because your red blood cells are transporting all of the goods to the rest of the cells, they don't have organelles themselves, so your red blood cells do not need oxygen for them to function in their own right, and they do not need other nutrients for the same reason. Right? So your red blood cells, right, they are shaped this way to increase surface area so that when they travel to the lungs, they can gather the most oxygen possible and then release the most carbon dioxide possible. And they are squishy so they can travel through capillaries, like we've just mentioned. They are small in shape for this same reason, right? But when we are talking about your actual red blood cell functions, they are filled with hemoglobin. They are over 95 or 97% hemoglobin, which is a very important molecule. Right? They also contain a couple of other plasma membrane proteins like spectrin and other proteins. Spectrin is the protein inside them that makes them flexible so they can squish and change shape as necessary. So spectrin allows your red blood cells to bend and become flexible so they can fit through and squeeze through your tiniest capillaries in your body, which, by the way, are located in your eye. Your smallest capillaries are in your eyes. And that protein gives them the flexibility to squeeze through there. That way, you don't make special red blood cells to go from your eye to your fingers to your toes. You just make the same red blood cells. They're all the same. They can all do the same job. So your red blood cells are a major factor contributing to your blood viscosity, the thickness to your blood. Right? Viscousness is how easily something flows. So if you were to have a jug of water and a jug of maple syrup and you decided to flip them both over and dump both out onto the floor, the water will clearly flow faster than the maple syrup out onto the floor. Maple syrup is more viscous than water is. Red blood cells contribute to your blood viscosity. And the more red blood cells you have in your blood, the thicker your blood is, or more viscous your blood is going to be. That means that if you have far too many red blood cells, your blood pressure will go up. And we'll touch on that in a little bit. Right? So we've talked about your structural characteristics of your red blood cells and how that contributes to gas transport. They are a biconcave disc shape, so they have a huge surface to volume ratio. They can carry more oxygen. They don't have a mitochondria, so that means they don't produce ATP. They don't need it, and they are all fully anaerobic. They don't need the oxygen that they are carrying to other cells, so that means they need fewer resources, and all of the resources they carry can go to the cells that need it. your red blood cells are pretty much dedicated to their job of respiratory gas transport. So your red blood cell, this is its lifespan. It has a nice little lifespan. When you have low oxygen levels in your kidney, which filters your blood and detects most of your blood stuff, detects that you have low oxygen levels, it's going to stimulate the kidney to produce a hormone called erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is going to leave the kidneys, go back into the bloodstream. And as your kidneys keep detecting that you have low red blood cell count, they make more erythropoietin, and it builds up in your bloodstream. Like erythropoietin levels are going to rise within your blood. When the erythropoietin levels are high enough and they reach your bones, right? Erythropoietin and necessary materials that make blood cells are going to end up being taken by your red bone marrow, and a process called erythropoiesis, or the creation of red blood cells, will begin in your bone or red bone marrow. And then from there, once the erythropoietin has caused erythropoiesis, new erythrocytes, or red blood cells, are going to be made in your red bone marrow. They're going to be released back in your bloodstream, and then they're going to do their job. Your red blood cells have a lifespan of about 120 days. That means that they can do their job and they do their thing for roughly 4 months. So it is 4 months from when they are created and made to when they keel over and die. Right? Right. So, just so you know what happens when they have given their all and they have passed away, right? When after those 120 days, when that red blood cell is old, can't do its job anymore to carry around the oxygen in your body, it may be damaged from having bumped into too many bad things in you, like a piece of cholesterol in your artery, something like that. What's going to happen is your blood does go through your liver and your spleen as checks. Your kidneys filter all of the waste products out of your blood, but your liver is also your body's poison control center, and if your kidneys don't filter it, your liver does. And your spleen is responsible for double-checking the things that your liver does and essentially monitoring the old blood cells. So what happens is, as this red blood cell has been knocking around for 120 days, it will end up at some point in its cycle through your body, it will end up back at your liver or your spleen, and it will be put down, or it will die there. Like, the cell will just die there. And your liver and your spleen take that red blood cell, and they break the red blood cell down to recycle it. Because the older a red blood cell gets, the more fragile it gets. Same as all of us as we get older, we get more fragile. But we can still use that hemoglobin and the heme groups that we will discuss later. So what happens is macrophages, which are a type of larger white blood cells that live in your liver and your spleen, they kind of go Pac-Man on your dying and dead red blood cells, and they engulf them, and it breaks them apart and recycles the pieces. Right? Your spleen is very important to this process, but if you've ever had mono to the point where your spleen burst, or you got a serious infection and you've had your spleen removed, your liver will pick up the slack for your now gone spleen, so you can live without your spleen in your body. But what both of these organs do, and mostly your spleen if you have it, is it will break down those red blood cells and start to recycle the pieces. So your spleen will break it down, put the globulin and the amino acids back into the bloodstream, but then it will keep the heme groups, remove the iron that is in your blood, so that it can be sent to your liver, used for good things, and then sent back to your bone marrow so it can be used for future erythropoiesis. And any waste byproduct from removing the iron and these other helpful parts from the heme groups ends up being put into the bile that your digestive system releases into a protein chemical called bilirubin. Bilirubin is a yellowish brownish sort of protein complex, and it is the waste byproduct from these dead red blood cells. Your liver then releases the bilirubin in its bile into your digestive system. Your digestive system sends all the waste byproducts through, and eventually you relieve yourself, and this bilirubin and waste byproduct goes with your fecal matter. Bilirubin is actually the protein that gives your fecal matter the color that it should be. So if you have like lighter brown poop, yellowish poop, that's the color it's supposed to be, and bilirubin is what gives it that color. Bilirubin is also the reason why, if you are an alcoholic and you end up with a disease called jaundice, and you are a lighter skin-toned individual, when you are jaundiced and your liver is not working correctly, that bilirubin starts to build up in your bloodstream if your liver cannot filter it out of you appropriately, so your skin will start to turn yellow, or the whites of your eyes will start to turn yellow. That's referenced in a number of novels and literary things, especially around Hemingway, because Hemingway was an alcoholic and he referenced his own afflictions a great deal in his writings. But those are symptoms of being jaundiced, which means your liver isn't doing all of its job. It's breaking down the red blood cells like it should be, but that stuff is backing up in your bloodstream and your liver's not getting rid of the byproduct. But that's what happens to your red blood cells after their 120 days after creation. They go on to your spleen and liver, broken down for spare parts. The useful bits go back into making brand new red blood cells so they can be reborn. And the old bits are left out of your body from waste. Right? Right. Oh, speaking of that, your liver is one of the things that processes this. If you have been eating a lot of iron-rich foods recently, that will make your feces a more green color. If you have too much bilirubin, your stool will be yellower in color. This is why when doctors ask for stool samples and that kind of thing, it's one of the things they're looking for. You can actually tell a lot about what's happening in the body by looking at the waste products. And as gross as that is, if we're going into the medical field, we need to take every hint and indication of potential afflictions and symptoms for our patients as possible. So occasionally people may be asked to notice that sort of thing, especially if you go into nursing and you're having to quantify things like how much urine is this patient producing when they do have a bowel movement, what are its characteristics, what's it like, that kind of thing. That's not a glamorous part of nursing that's normally discussed very frequently, but it is indeed part of the job. So you may see some gross stuff. Just giving you a heads up. Right? So when we start discussing your imbalances and such, anemia is some form of insufficient numbers of red blood cells, or hemoglobin. Something is wrong between the amount of red blood cells or hemoglobin you have, and when you have anemia, your body's tissues are going to be deprived of oxygen. We're going to come back to these disorders. Polycythemia means you are overproducing red blood cells, which increases your blood viscosity. Right, we'll get to that in just a second after we have talked about your hematopoiesis, which is indeed how your red blood cells are formed. Right? So hematopoiesis, hemato is blood. Poiesis is the fancy end terminology for creation of blood cell. So hematopoiesis is blood cell formation. Right? All of your blood cell formation occurs in red bone marrow, and that's in your axial skeleton, if you remember from ANP1. Your axial skeleton would be like your long bones that are in your arms and your legs. This can also happen in the girdle skeletons, like your shoulder blades and your hips, especially around the proximal epiphyses of your humerus and femur in adults. That would be where the growth line is for children. A difference between adults and infants, though. In infants and a fetus, this process happens everywhere in all the bone systems. So fetuses are brand new, they are just getting started on life, so every bit of them that can produce blood cells produces the blood cells that the little fetus needs when it's inside mom. Because there is a barrier between the fetus's blood system and mom's blood system. So everything can perform this function for tiny fetus and in newborns. As you grow up to be an adult, we're talking about just your axial skeleton, which would be your arms and legs. Right? But essentially, you have these stem cells, right, called a hemocytoblast, right? And the hemocytoblast is eventually going to break down and give rise to, so this would be your hematocytoblast, and eventually it breaks down into all of your formed elements. Hormones and growth factors push the cell, each one of these individual cells, toward a specific pathway in their blood cell development. Some of them, when your body needs it and your kidneys have said, we created more erythropoietin, will go from hemocytoblast to going through their cycle to inevitably become your erythrocyte, which is your red blood cell. Others, based upon infections and health and whatnot, may become other types of white blood cells to help with your immune system. And then others may go the route of becoming a megakaryocyte and then forming blood platelets. It just depends upon the other signals that your body sends to your red bone marrow as to what gets formed where. So new blood cells are going to enter your blood sinusoids, and they're going to wait until those sinusoids are needed, and then begin production during puberty, and again at low rate during menopause. This sort of thing happens. The good news about this is why bone marrow transplants are good for leukemia, because this is a form of stem cell. I know you might have heard of stem cell as part of the abortion debate and that sort of thing, but our bodies produce multiple types of stem cells, and these hematocytoblasts are the stem cells for all of our blood cells. So when they are giving a leukemia patient a bone marrow transplant, they are transplanting another individual's hematocytoblasts into the patient's body in the hopes that these new stem cells will produce white blood cells. Because if you have leukemia, that means a type of white blood cell has cancer and is not doing its job or forming correctly. So the hope is that when they put new bone marrow in you from the bone marrow transplant, when your body kicks back up again and starts making new blood cells, the new blood cells that your body's creating won't be sick. That is what a bone marrow transplant is, and why these blood stem cells are very, very important. Specifically for erythropoiesis, which is the formation or production of your red blood cells, you have that hematocytoblast at the very beginning of the process, and it's going to transform into a pro-erythroblast. Pro means before, so when you proceed someone, or a proceed in a book is the part of the book that's before the rest of it. Or if you precede someone, you're walking in front of them. So the pro-erythroblast is what happens before the erythroblast is formed. And then your erythroblasts are going to form into an early erythroblast. Right, and then as it gets older and continues its formations, it will develop into a late erythroblast, and inevitably lose its nucleus and form a reticulocyte at the very end of things. And then after it has a reticulocyte, it finishes forming into a erythrocyte. During erythropoiesis, the ribosomes are going to synthesize, hemoglobin is going to accumulate, so somewhere in this erythroblast stages, they are gathering more and more hemoglobin, ribosomes are being made, and then during this last bit right before it becomes a reticulocyte, it loses its nucleus. It just ejects it, spits it out, kind of deal. So then the reticulocytes kind of degrade a little bit and become mature erythrocytes. So when doctors are counting how quickly you are making your erythrocytes, they count your reticulocyte count, because your reticulocyte count indicates the rate of red blood cell formation. You should be able to place the order of erythropoiesis. You should be able to, say the list of hematocytoblast, pro-erythroblast, early erythroblast, late erythroblast, normal cytoblast, reticulocyte, and erythrocyte. Those should be pretty straightforward as a chain of events that you guys should know. Right? And here you have an even better picture, once again. Right? So your body is going to do this whenever you start to experience hypoxia, meaning you don't have enough oxygen in your blood tissues to function. So when you have too few red blood cells, that leads to your tissue being hypoxic. When you have too many red blood cells, it increases your blood viscosity. So if your blood viscosity gets low, your body will want to make more, right? You will make fewer of them if your blood gets too thick. The balance between your red blood cell production and their destruction or death depend on hormonal controls, adequate supplies of iron, amino acids, and vitamin B in your body. Erythropoietin is a hormone that is produced by your kidneys, and it directly stimulates erythropoiesis. It is released by your kidneys in response to hypoxia because your kidneys are one of the things that detect hypoxia. Causes of hypoxia could be any number of things. So hemorrhage, meaning you're bleeding out, can cause hypoxia, because hypoxia is your fancy term for low oxygen levels. It doesn't matter what caused them. So hypoxia could be caused by bleeding out. It could be caused by destruction of red blood cells or reduced red blood cell numbers. It could be caused by mountain climbing. When you're high up in the air and there are reduced oxygen levels for you to breathe, you end up with hypoxia due to reduced oxygen levels. If you have insufficient iron deficiencies or hemoglobin, you will end up hypoxic. If you can't breathe due to illnesses like COVID or bronchitis, you may end up hypoxic. There are a number of reasons why your blood oxygen content may go down. So generally speaking, when that goes down, your body starts to try to produce more red blood cells to make it go up again. EPO, or erythropoietin, has a few effects to it. It makes these cells mature more rapidly in the bone marrow, and it also increases the circulation of reticulocytes in 1 to 2 days. So erythropoietin has a 1 to 2 day turnaround from what it can do. However, and this is why men have a higher hematocrit than women do, testosterone, which is a higher proportion in men, actually enhances erythropoietin production. So because men have more testosterone enhances the amount of erythropoietin their body produces, and that results in men having a higher red blood cell count as opposed to women, simply because they have more testosterone, and testosterone amps up your erythropoietin levels. And this is all controlled by a negative feedback mechanism, based upon hypoxia. When you go into hypoxia, your body starts producing erythropoietin, wants to make more red blood cells, and when your blood oxygen levels go back to being right, your body stops producing erythropoietin, and you just wait for things to work out, right? So this is a negative feedback mechanism. You make more red blood cells when your body needs more red blood cells based upon your oxygen levels. Right? So happy little negative feedback system right here. Iron is very important for all of this, and this is going to get into our function of erythrocytes and actually talking about hemoglobin. So blood objective number 5 is describe the chemical structure of hemoglobin. For those of you that have taken chemistry or organic chemistry, you've seen this, right? It's like, that'll make much more sense to you if you've taken chemistry. For those that have not taken chemistry, understand that hemoglobin is a protein group that is in your red blood cells. It is made from 4 different protein chains. So you have alpha chains and beta chains. So you got 2 betas and 2 alpha chains. They are the things that in these colorful pictures just look like ribbons that are knotted together. You have 4 of them all knotted together themselves. And in the middle of each of these protein chains is a chemical called a heme. Right? Heme is the part of these protein chains that holds onto the iron. So iron is a part of the heme group. And heme is also a red pigment that is bonded to each of these globulin chains. Right? So iron has to be a part of the heme group. And there you go. Once again, this picture right here will probably make more sense if you've had chemistry. For those that haven't, focus on your pretty little ribbon picture. Right? So as you can see, iron is a part that's Fe2, because ferrous is your Latin term for iron. So Fe2 plus is your iron that's in the middle of each of these heme groups. So you have an iron atom in every single heme, and that can bond to a single oxygen molecule, because iron bonds to oxygen really, really well. Iron is needed here so that the oxygen will stick to your heme group. This is why we need iron in our diets and why we need iron. Each of these hemoglobin molecules can transport 4 O2 molecules. So each of these ribbon molecules here can transport 4 oxygen molecules. That's 1 oxygen molecule per little heme group in each corner. Right? Because each red blood cell can hold up to a billion molecules, billion with a B, molecules of oxygen, the reason why they can do that is because they have around 425 million hemoglobin in them. So every single red blood cell you have in your body has roughly 425 million of these hemoglobins inside them. And because each one of these hemoglobins can carry 4 oxygen molecules apiece, that means each red blood cell in your body can hold up to a billion oxygen molecules. If you're doing the math, as insane as that sounds. Right? So when this is loading in your lungs, here we go. So when this is passing through the capillaries in your lungs, oxygen is loaded into the heme groups and sticks onto the iron in it. That produces something called oxyhemoglobin, which is a ruby red color. You guys have all seen this color before. What happens when you leave a rusty metal, like a rusty nail, outside in the rain? It rusts. The entire reason why our blood is red is because of the rust color that is made when the oxygen attaches to the iron in our in our hemoglobin molecules. That is the entire reason why we look pink. That is the reason why our blood is red, is because it's rusted. As simple as that and insane as it is, there you go. This oxygen ends up being unloaded into the tissues of your body, which means it produces deoxyhemoglobin, which makes this hemoglobin lose its oxygen, so it loses its brighter scarlet rusted color and ends up turning into a very deep dark red that is almost borderline purple, which is why people say that your veins have a darker shade of red blood in them, because veins carry deoxygenated blood. About 20% of the carbon dioxide that your tissues have to give up are going to end up sticking to the hemoglobin when carbon dioxide is going to bind to your hemoglobin. But most of your body's carbon dioxide, instead of binding back onto the hemoglobin directly, is going to attach itself to globulins, amino acids within your blood, which is going to create something called carbaminohemoglobin, and that occurs readily when hemoglobin is in your reduced state. But we're going to talk a little, this process right here also includes things like bicarbonate, and we will discuss that more when we talk about your respiratory system and what happens to the carbon dioxide that you need to exhale. But this is how oxygen loads into each hemoglobin group. You breathe in, these deoxyhemoglobins in your red blood cells pass through your capillaries in your lungs, and an oxygen molecule attaches to each and every one of the little itty-bitty ions in the hemoglobin. And then they take it to your body tissues, right? And that is how your red blood cells function. Unfortunately, though, lots of stuff can go wrong with your red blood cells, right? Lots of things can indeed go wrong with this. Right, so that brings us to blood objective number 6. Discuss pathologies caused by erythrocyte abnormalities, including the symptoms and the causes. Right? So we're going to talk about one of the easier, weirder ones first. That is not a form of anemia. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit to this one slide back up here. I think I've already passed it and missed it. I did indeed. I'm terrible. Right here. Polycythemia. We're going to, before we start talking about the many types of anemias, we're going to talk about polycythemia. So polycythemia, poly meaning many, cyte cell, emia meaning of the blood. So many blood cells is what this word literally translates to. Polycythemia means you have an excess of red blood cells, and that is going to increase your blood viscosity. That can happen for one of two reasons. Reason number one would be polycythemia vera. That is the condition when your body is creating too much of it, and usually that condition comes about from bone marrow cancer. Because if your bone marrow ends up with cancer and it cannot adequately stop itself from making more red blood cells because it's just producing like wild, like cancer cells tend to do, you will end up having way too many red blood cells. And then you'll have to deal with the cancer in order to cure your polycythemia. The other forms of polycythemia is called secondary polycythemia. And that happens when less oxygen is available, like when you're at a high altitude, or when your erythropoietin production is increased, meaning you will have a higher red blood cell count. Secondary polycythemia can either be natural or unnatural, which is one of the things we are going to talk about. Naturally speaking, some populations of people, because they live at higher altitudes and function at higher altitudes, naturally produce more red blood cells than others. We take full advantage of this in things like sporting events. Let's be honest here. This is why a number of people from Kenya have been granted American citizenship so they could run on our Olympic running teams and that sort of thing, because there are people that live at higher altitudes in the mountains from Kenya, in other regions of Mexico, that kind of thing, and their bodies naturally have more red blood cells in them, and if they naturally have more red blood cells in them, that means they can run faster without getting tired, and they can run longer without getting tired, making them better for sports investments. So individuals with these kind of conditions tend to be good with sports. We also induce that kind of secondary polycythemia intentionally with our sports teams. This is why our Olympic sports teams have a tendency to practice in places like Colorado. Colorado is a very mountainous state, and because our athletes are training high up in the mountains, if the Olympics are somewhere like Brazil, where they are almost at sea level, our athletes will perform better because they are used to competing hard at the high altitudes as opposed to sea level, and that gives them a slight advantage. That being said, you can also artificially induce secondary polycythemia through cheating in sports called blood doping. So blood doping is done when usually an Olympic athlete or an individual or person, a few weeks before their sporting event, they are going to remove some of the blood volume from their body. So they will take a pint of their own blood out and put it in the refrigerator. That way they induce their own body into hypoxia. And their body naturally, after you've lost some blood or donated blood, whatever, your body naturally produces more erythropoietin and produces more red blood cells and brings your blood volume back up to where it should be. This is what happens when we donate blood. And it normally takes about 4 days for your body to respond to that and bounce back fully. Your red blood cell count increases in 2 days. So that means if you donate blood to the Red Cross, you're going to be perfectly fine 4 days later. And you'll have the same amount of red blood cells in 2 days that you did after you donated. For our sports individuals that are blood doping, they set that up. They have taken their own blood and put it in the refrigerator or ice with the help of a doctor or medical professional. And they bounce back in half a week because they're going to bounce back in those 4 days as well. But before they go on to their sporting event, they put their own blood back inside them. And by putting their own blood back inside themselves, now that individual has a higher red blood cell count that they can use for swimming competitions, cycling competitions, marathon running, all that kind of stuff, because they have more red blood cells that will give them greater stamina. They won't, meaning they're not going to get tired as easily, and they're going to be able to run faster and farther without getting tired. And because it is their own blood, it's not synthetic, and it's harder to detect that kind of thing on blood tests for the Olympic Games and whatnot than it would be if they were just testing for added steroids and that kind of thing, because they're just adding their own blood back to their own body. The downside to this is after they have put their blood back inside them, that causes their blood viscosity to skyrocket, because they've just overpacked their body with their own blood, or their blood vessels with their own blood. And because of the additional red blood cells that they've just put back in themselves, that puts them at a much higher risk of stroke, heart attack, and blood clots until their body re-evens out the amount of blood inside them. So you could have some very poor and very immediate and bad side effects to cheating in such a way for the Olympic Games. However, they can indeed discover that kind of cheating, which, if you remember a few years ago, maybe 2 Olympics ago, the entire Tour de France cycling team was discovered to having been cheating in this way, including Neil Armstrong. And they actually took the prizes and the medals away from the first 7 people in the competition, and the dude that crossed the finish line 8th became the first place winner after that scandal, because the people that came in places 1 through 7 were all cheating in that way in the Tour de France. So sports officials will take this stuff seriously, and it can have very bad side effects and after effects to the body, but it is still something that's done. Now that we've talked about what happens if you have too much red blood cells, we're going to talk about anemia, which is way more common, and what happens, the various reasons why you may have non-functioning or way too little red blood cell count. So, Anemia is when your blood has abnormally low oxygen levels or carrying capacity. Most of the time, anemia is a symptom or a sign of a bigger problem and not a disease itself. So the majority of the time, anemia is a symptom of something else that's wrong instead of being the only thing that's wrong. But the point of anemia is that your blood oxygen levels can't actually support your normal metabolic rate and your normal metabolism. And because of that, anemia is accompanied by being tired all the time, constant fatigue. You may end up being more pale than you should. Because you can't get the oxygen around your body like you need to, you may have shortness of breath, and because your blood is not flowing appropriately and you can't carry the nutrients you need, you may be constantly cold or have chills because of that as well. Those are some general and basic symptoms and side effects of anemia. But anemia itself can be caused by a number of things. Right? So the first set of causes for anemia are insufficient red blood cells. So insufficient red blood cells, something is wrong, you don't have enough red blood cells, so insufficient erythrocytes. Hemorrhagic anemia is the first anemia on this list for that. Hemorrhagic anemia is caused by either acute or chronic loss of blood. So if you are constantly losing blood inside your body because you have a stomach ulcer and it's just bleeding out into your digestive system and you don't realize it, that would be a more chronic loss of blood in your body. Acute would be you're in a car accident and you're losing a lot of blood from the car accident. Acute is sudden onset. It doesn't matter if it's a natural cause or an accidental cause from external. But that's what hemorrhagic anemia is. So hemorrhagic anemia is caused because, for whatever reason, you have blood loss. You don't have the amount of red blood cells you need, meaning you don't have the oxygen you need going through your body. Oop. Nope. Hemolytic anemia is the same concept, except with hemolytic anemia, your red blood cells are dying too soon and they are rupturing like little bitty balloons prematurely. This can also happen with a type of anemia called aplastic anemia. Aplastic anemia is the destruction or inhibition of your red bone marrow. So aplastic anemia happens when your red bone marrow is sick or something has gone wrong with it, so it cannot produce more red blood cells. Aplastic anemia is one that I highly recommend you know out of this list. It's one of the anemias that they like to ask about on your final exam, because not only does that affect your list of anemias that you need to know, but aplastic anemia is also a major side effect of illnesses and cancers like leukemia, because leukemia, which is a type of illness in your white blood cells, can lead to damage from your red bone marrow, and it can lead to aplastic anemia as a symptom of your leukemia. Aplastic anemia can also be a major indicator of cancer, bone cancer, or a tumor that's going to interfere with your red blood cell production. Something is wrong that is preventing or slowing down creation of your red blood cells, and it is causing aplastic anemia. But it tends to be aplastic anemia has a very strong correlation to more unpleasant illnesses like leukemia because of that. And we get more into leukemia and cancer in your immune system, so that this is a form of leukemia, or this is a form of anemia that is going to cross the lines into talking about your immune system as well. Other types of anemias can vary because of iron deficiency. If you have a low hemoglobin count, for example. So iron deficiency anemia is one of the most common types of anemia. And iron deficiency anemia can result from a number of things. Either it's a secondary result of hemorrhagic anemia and your body didn't have enough iron when you tried to rebuild more red blood cells, so you don't have enough hemoglobin inside the red blood cells you do have. You may have an adequate intake of iron-containing foods. Some places of the world are very nutrient lacking in iron. This is one reason why, if you start doing World Health Organization research and that sort of thing, in countries like Cambodia, one of their health initiatives is actually giving families these small itty-bitty little cast iron fish to put in their soup pots so that when they make soup, they have a little bitty cast iron fish in the soup that is just leaching iron into the soup that they are making for their families to help give their families a source of iron because they don't get enough of it in their diets. Because yes, that will work and help increase your iron levels if you do that. You could also have something wrong with your body, and you may have an impaired iron absorption deficiency. It just depends upon what's happening. So either your body is not processing iron appropriately, or you may not be getting enough iron. If you do have this type of anemia, by the way, you can buy iron supplements over the counter if you feel like that'll help you, but one of the easiest ways that you can solve this at home without a doctor's prescription is by cooking in a cast iron skillet. Because the cast iron that the skillet is made out of leaches into the food you cook into it, so you automatically get a little bit more iron in your food when you cook in cast iron skillets. So you might want to talk to your grandmother and learn the appropriate ways to clean your cast iron skillet, because Lord knows you don't wash that, you season it. And listen to your grandmother when she tells you how, because that woman will probably have a heart attack if you ever put your cast iron skillet in a washing machine. But cooking in cast iron can increase your iron levels and help completely defeat this type of anemia. So that's something important or good to think about. It's a rather simple non-medical solution to things. Another type of anemia that is a form of an autoimmune disease is called pernicious anemia. For pernicious anemia to happen, right, you have a deficiency of vitamin B12, because vitamin B12 is needed for your body to produce the hemoglobin that is within your red blood cells. Usually, the reason why you have a lack of vitamin B12 in your body is because you lack something called intrinsic factor, which is a protein produced by your stomach, because your stomach is what absorbs vitamin B12 from the food that you eat. So a lack of intrinsic factor is needed intrinsic factor is needed to absorb vitamin B12, and if you have a lack of it in your stomach, you are not going to absorb enough B12. Honestly, this entire form of anemia can be treated by an intramuscular or between the muscles injection of vitamin B12, or an application of Nascobal, which is a medication for it. Usually, this type of anemia can be found with patients with HIV or AIDS, intestinal parasites, because tapeworms absorb all of your vitamin B12 and B before you get a chance to get it. So if you have intestinal parasites, you may end up with this form of anemia. This can also happen with individuals who have Crohn's disease because their intestines are not absorbing properly, or individuals who have had bariatric or weight loss surgery because they've either stapled their stomach and they no longer have their entire stomach for nutrient absorption, or they got the gastric band, which is cutting off space or surface area for absorption to occur. This is one reason why people have to take vitamin supplements after they've had those kind of surgeries. This can also be found in your geriatric patients or older, because your older patients don't always have the best eating habits. And they have other problems in their life and their health that are compounding with other things. Because pernicious anemia goes into a number of other diseases that have to do with your digestive system and stomach, as well as HIV. Know this will highlight pernicious anemia as well as the aplastic anemia, because pernicious anemia can come up on your Unit 3 digestive system exam as well as this one. I have seen it referenced in multiple places. Make sure you know this one. Right. And here's your aplastic anemia slide. Because your bone marrow is sick and you can't make enough anemia, or you can't make enough red blood cells, you end up anemic. And then you have abnormal hemoglobin. Sometimes when our bodies create hemoglobin, something has gone wrong, and something is wrong. Genetically speaking, something has gone wrong. And there are two types of anemia that are common for you to know about for this. The first one is thalassemia. Thalassemia is a genetic blood disorder. And the patient essentially has absent or very faulty globulin chains. So they're missing their globulin chains within their blood, so they don't have any of that do its normal jobs, so things break down. Because those globulin chains are missing, the red blood cells are very, very thin. They are very fragile. They're very delicate. And they don't have enough hemoglobin because this is missing. Because this is missing some of those globulins that make up the hemoglobin. This is an inherited condition. It's genetic, so you got it from your parents. Most of the time, thalassemia, though not as common in the United States, it generally occurs in individuals from Middle Eastern or Southeast Asian descent. Sometimes it happens in people of Mediterranean ancestry. So just that region of the world has had this genetic mutation pop up that causes their red blood cells to be far more fragile, so they break down and rupture or lyse prematurely before their 120-day lifespan. So they end up with this type of anemia because their red blood cells die too quickly, essentially. Once again, that's not something that's normally found in America as far as our region of the planet. But if you go and do work for the World Health Organization, Doctors Without Borders, anything like that, you may see this far more often because this does happen with people of Middle Eastern descent, Mediterranean descent, and Southeast Asian descent. Right? The other one, though, is far more prevalent in the United States, and it's called sickle cell anemia. So sickle cell anemia is a recessive trait, and you can either have the severe form of this, where, backtracking to biology 1, every single one of us have 2 genes that control everything in our bodies, one from our mother and one from our father, if we're going back to genetics. You can carry sickle cell anemia and have a slightly weakened form of it where only one of your 2 genes carried the sickle cell, and the other gene is normal. Or you could be one of the unfortunate individuals who inherited 2 mutated genes, so both of your genes code for sickle cell anemia, in which case you have a severe case of sickle cell anemia. So what happens is patients with sickle cell anemia have defective gene codes for hemoglobin. And the defective gene code, instead of being your capital H lowercase b for the abbreviation for hemoglobin, it has a capital S after it. So this means you have a mutated form of hemoglobin for sickle cell. That is the shorthand for this. The reason why it is called sickle cell anemia is because normal red blood cells, like we've discussed, they are these little happy little squishy donuts, right? They are the happy little squishy donuts that you can sit on top of and enjoy, and that squish through your blood capillaries and that kind of thing. For patients with sickle cell anemia, after their hemoglobin has given up the oxygen to the cells, instead of staying happy donut-shaped squishy biconcave discs, their red blood cells actually shrink in on themselves and become sickle-shaped. A sickle, if you do not know what that is, because it's an old-fashioned farming term, is the old carved blade that the Grim Reaper actually carries, because that's the tool that used to be used to harvest wheat and sugarcane from fields. So sickle cell anemia, after each individual red blood cell gives up the oxygen to cells that need it, each individual red blood cell becomes rigid and pointy and sharp and sickle-shaped. So these individuals with sickle cell anemia tend to be in a lot of pain, especially if they have the severe version of the disease, because literally their red blood cells go from being soft and squishy to stabbing them from the inside. This is why a number of individuals with sickle cell may end up on pain medication to help cope with that pain. They're probably not faking it. Remember, 25% of these individual cells are stabbing them from the inside out. I can't imagine that kind of pain. It would hurt a great deal. It also, because of that bad shape, has a tendency to cause blood clots and other problems because their red blood cells cannot squish through the same capillaries and get places as easily in the body. So it has a tendency to back up the system and cause blood clots and other major problems down the line. Right? Generally speaking, in the United States, sickle cell anemia is found in high proportion in the African American community. So this is a disease or a disorder that does affect Black Americans worse than white Americans. And the reason for that is because traditionally as well, populations that lived around the Mediterranean Sea and in Africa carried the gene for sickle cell anemia. This is sort of a cruel fate deal. The reason why sickle cell persists in those populations today is because having sickle cell, or the carried version of it, the light version of it, can actually help prevent cases of malaria. So if your family lived in a region where malaria was prevalent, if you did not have any of these sickle cell genes and you were just your typical average individual, you would probably actually die from malaria and not be able to live long enough to get married and have your own kids. And on the flip side of things, if you were one of those individual people that had the severe form of sickle cell anemia, unfortunately, you would probably also die before you could have kids as well. But those people in the population that carried sickle cell anemia but didn't full-blown have it, their lives were a little bit more uncomfortable, but those people also did not die from malaria, and we're talking about this disease mutating and happening hundreds of years ago, much, much, much further back than modern medicine. So this was a natural biological way for people that lived around the Mediterranean and in northern Africa to survive malaria infections. And unfortunately, because of our history and how individuals and their ancestors reached the United States, we have disproportionately caused a number of individuals in our country to now have sickle cell, and it is mostly represented in our African American population. This is something that needs to be considered if you want to go into the healthcare profession and if you're testing an African American patient for different types of anemias and that kind of thing. Please listen to your patients, listen to their symptoms, and take good care of them. Right? And that is the last anemia form that you guys needed to know. Once again, here's a picture. So you go from, and this is a genetic disorder. There is no cure for sickle cell anemia, though scientists are currently working on it, and some treatments have shown promise for changing this, but you can't edit your DNA right now. So right now, all we can do is treat this. We cannot cure it. So sickle cell anemia, once again with the picture, this is how your red blood cells are supposed to react. This is how they react in an individual with sickle cell, meaning it's going to block blood flow and be pointy and be unpleasant. Right? And that's it for your red blood cells. I will pick up with you guys again in your white blood cell video. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.